Mrs. McBride, thank you for coming here today. Or actually, we came here today. So.
Well, thank you for coming here. It's great
Thank you
to
for
have
being
you.
here. Yes, thank you for having us. I gotta say, this is an awesome moment because we're getting to talk with somebody who's in the weeds of Congress. You're on the floor. You're within the headlines, not a part of them. You're seeing it happen before it happens. And I think a lot of people today have a lot of questions about what's going on at the national level. And I want to ask some of those, but I want to start with you because you were extremely interesting. You started at Cab Calloway.
Yes.
Immediately entered out of that into Jack Markell's staff, correct?
So I volunteered on campaigns in middle school and high school. My first paid job was on Jack Markell's campaign for governor in 07 and 08, and I was a junior and senior in college.
Was that intimidating?
Very intimidating, very intimidating. Although I was a field organizer, so I was out knocking on doors, and I was out knocking on doors in West Wilmington, which is where I grew up. So I got to knock on doors for with neighbors, and I got to talk about a candidate who I was passionate about. He was running for governor at the time. He was the underdog. He was running against the establishment, and so it was in an exciting election as well with Obama in 08. So it was just an incredibly exciting time to be involved. It was my first election where I could vote. And so all of these things coming together, my first vote was for Barack Obama in the February 2008 Delaware Democratic primary. I was volunteering for Jack Markell. And, I had caught this bug here in Delaware at a young age being involved in politics because this is a small state, right? We might have the largest representative district, but we're a small state. Everyone's dated, mated, or related. And you get to know your elected officials. You get to meet your elected officials when you just show up and volunteer to knock on doors. And so I caught the bug because I felt like even at 13, 14, 15, 16, like my voice mattered.
Well, we're going to come back to like that 2008, 2010 pre-Obama because interesting stats around there. But again, back into you getting started, many young people want to get started into this. You admit you caught the bug early for politics, for change. Why is that? Because a lot of people see issues, but they're just like, oh, those are the issues. What made you say, okay, I want to be a part of maybe shifting the direction of things?
So, one of the things that people in elected office are never supposed to admit is that they were interested in politics before they got into politics. We like people to just sort of pretend like they rolled out of bed one morning and found themselves in Congress. And for some people that might be a closer to authentic story, but I just lay my cards out on the table. I got really interested at a young age, but for me, I got interested in politics because of my own struggle with who I am. I'm trans, and growing up, buried in the closet, I was scared. I felt alone. And as I started to grow up with this fact about myself that I was ashamed of and felt like I needed to hide, I realized that this world was just not built for someone like me to live openly and authentic, fully and freely. And I really sort of worried that the heart of my community and the heart of my country, that they weren't big enough to love me. And I faced sort of a crisis of hope as a young person. And as a kid, I wanted to be an architect. And so I used to read about different buildings around the world, and I stumbled across these books about the Capitol and the White House. And as I started to read these books, I started to marvel at not just the beauty of these buildings, but the history that occurred within their walls. Because as I read those books, I realized that the through line of every chapter was the story of advocates, activists, and a handful of courageous elected officials working together to right the wrongs of our past and address injustice. And I found hope in that storyline. I found hope in the possibilities in our politics. And so I decided to get involved. And I just started showing up to knock on doors and to make phone calls for candidates who caught my interest at a young age. I didn't necessarily know what I thought on every single issue, but I knew that I believed that the greatness of this country was in our journey toward a deeper meaning of freedom for more and more people. the fight for equality and justice. And I also felt a deep sense of luck in my lot in life. I mean,
Fortune, yeah.
Despite being buried in the closet, despite the pain that sort of drove me to find politics as a source of hope, I also knew how lucky I was. I knew how lucky I was literally driving essentially across this city behind me from where I grew up to elementary school on the east side of Wilmington, and you could see the stark economic disparity and also how that overlaid with racial disparities. And I knew how lucky I was, and I wanted to make sure that matters such as the family you're born into, or the color of your skin, or the gender with which you identify, that those backgrounds and identities don't dictate a person's life and their capacity to live fully and freely in our society.
That's interesting. So you didn't view politics as a career opportunity, more so maybe as an opportunity
to create change. Because I think, and I still feel this way.
And that started with you.
It started with my own struggle, and I didn't know whether I wanted to run for office or work in government or work in politics or whatever. I just knew that politics was the place where every avenue of society converges and where you can make the most amount of change for the most number of people in the most number of ways possible. And I think when you're young and you are hiding who you are, you're actually kind of forced to grapple with a lot of existential questions that people don't typically grapple with until they're much older, because you realize you're watching your one life pass by as someone you're not. And you start to think about what are my regrets going to be when I grow up? What are my regrets going to be at the end of my life? And I think, obviously at a certain point I realized that my biggest regret would be a life that was lived inauthentically. But I also really started to think about what brings me happiness and purpose. And I've decided the places I see and the change I bring. And it's why I say, if this doesn't work out, I'd love to be a travel writer, because I love travel and I love to see different places and learn about different people. But I want to bring change, and this is the place where you can make the most amount of change.
So you interned at the White House in 2012. Mm-hmm. Then you were on the board of directors for Equality in Delaware to advocate against that very hate crime, 2013. Mm-hmm. Gave your first TED Talk in 2016, and the same year you got to speak at the DNC.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I spoke at the Democratic National Convention in 2016. I had been an advocate. I had been working in equal rights for the previous couple of years. And I had been sort of at the forefront of this movement for LGBTQ equality, first here in Delaware, and then nationally. I became the national spokesperson for an organization called the Human Rights Campaign. They have the little yellow equal sign over the blue background sticker that you often see. They're the main LGBTQ equal rights organization. And I had seen that personal stories were really necessary to spur progress, to spur passion that spurs progress. People shouldn't have to bare their souls. People shouldn't have to bring their vulnerabilities to the table to get people to do the right thing, but I saw how powerful it was, and I started to share my story publicly through my advocacy. And so in 2016, there was 7 minutes on stage reserved for the LGBTQ Equality Caucus on Capitol Hill, where I now serve. I'm now in this caucus. But they only had gay, lesbian, and bisexual members at the time. And 2016 was the year where we started to see the first anti-trans legislation bubble up in places like North Carolina. And the Equality Caucus decided that it was important to have, for the first time ever, someone who was transgender speak on the main stage of the convention, to reinforce for our party and people back home that these debates that they were starting to hear about were about real people. And so, for whatever reason, they asked me to take half their time, and they ceded the stage to me, and I got to share my story and my passions and my experience as a caregiver to my husband Andy during his battle with cancer. from that stage. And it was one of the first times where I really started to realize that maybe there is a place for someone like me in our politics beyond just working at an advocacy group. Perhaps there's a place in our politics on that main stage for someone who was like me, because for the rest of my life up until that point, I had thought that my identity was mutually exclusive with really having a meaningful role in our politics.
I think there's a lot of young people that reason with their feeling like they're having to portray a different identity than what they actually want to portray in any one way, shape, or form, whether it be via some emotional trauma that holds them back or not willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Even at an interpersonal level. That was going to be my question for you. Like, how nervous, honestly, going up on the DNC, being that vulnerable, even for that 7-minute span? I mean, how nervous were you for that?
I was really nervous.
I would imagine.
Because was literally speaking in the arena where the 76ers play, right?
Oh, okay.
So there's tens of thousands of people there. And then on top of that, you're on live TV, right? Every CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they're all covering it. And so you've got millions of people watching at home. This was a particular moment since I was going to be the first person like me to speak on any convention stage. And so I was really nervous. But I got to tell you, the thing that I was most nervous about, this is weird, is the thing about a convention is it's 4 days, several hours each day. Most people don't listen in the convention arena to the speeches. They're talking amongst themselves or milling about, unless you are like the nominee. Mm-hmm. People just don't pay attention. And so it's loud in the arena. And someone warned me ahead of time, it's going to be loud in there. And the instinct of the speaker on that stage is to start to scream and project in order to get people's attention and invite the audience in. But they said, you're not talking to the people in the arena. You're talking to the TV audience, and you're talking to the future history that would document this moment. And so don't yell. Don't scream, because it doesn't look good on TV. And I was really nervous that I was going to walk on the stage and everyone would be talking, and I just sort of instinctively start to project too much. And I will say on top of that, my parents were in the audience, and I was so nervous that my parents were going to be hurt if everyone was talking when I was trying to speak, that they would be upset that people weren't paying attention. So I was really nervous that that was all going to unfold. And they announce us, and we walk out, me and some members of Congress, and for the first time that Thursday evening in the arena, people were quiet.
Oh, man.
And they were applauding, and they were paying attention. And honestly, in that moment, all of my nerves washed away.
Really? I was going to ask if the opposite happened, like you were planning for this, and then it didn't happen, and you're like, oh my gosh, everyone's listening to me.
I don't know what it was, but I think the thing that I was most nervous about didn't happen, and then I felt love in the arena, and I just sort of felt carried by that love to do what I needed to do.
You went from state senator to then wanting to walk into Congress, which is a gigantic leap. There are so many people who will take on a political role of some kind in their local communities or even for their state that never even think about the idea of going into a national political position like you did. Was there a moment where you're like, this is where I want to go, this is what I want to do, or did it just seem like the natural progression from where you're at?
So, I think for me, the moment that propelled me not just to run for Congress, but to run for any public office, because up until all these points that we've been talking about, I had been either a volunteer, a staffer, or an advocate, specifically working on LGBTQ non-discrimination protections. And as important as those protections are, as critical as it is to advance equality specifically for the LGBTQ community, I am passionate about so much more than just that. And the experience that actually propelled me first to run for the state Senate and then eventually to run for Congress was my experience I mentioned as a caregiver to the man who would become my husband, Andy, during his battle with cancer. And we met when we were both advocates, actually. We met when I was interning in the White House, and then we became advocates. We worked together to expand access to health care for the LGBTQ community and to stop discrimination in health care. And we met at a pretty young age. I was still in college. He was 24, 25 at the time. And about a year and a half, 2 years into our relationship, he developed a sore on his tongue. And eventually we found out that this sore was cancer. And, you know, you never expect to hear that word. You never want to hear that word, and you certainly don't expect to hear that word in your 20s. And if you've ever been diagnosed with cancer or had a loved one diagnosed with cancer, it just feels like a punch in the gut. It feels like the world is coming crashing in on you. And especially at that young age, it stops you dead in your tracks. But from the first moment after he was diagnosed, in part because of the work that we had been doing in healthcare, we knew how lucky he was. We knew how lucky both of us were. We knew how lucky he was to have health insurance that would allow him to get care. And we both knew how lucky we were to have flexibility with our jobs that allowed him to focus on the full-time job of getting care and me to focus on the full-time job of caring for him, loving him, and then when we found out that his cancer was terminal, for us to be able to get married and for me to walk him to his passing. And while cancer ultimately took his life at 27, up until his last breath, we knew how lucky we were. He knew how lucky he was. And I decided to run first for the state Senate and then eventually for Congress, because I just simply do not believe that in a state of neighbors like Delaware or in the wealthiest nation on earth, that time and that ability to get care should be a matter of luck. I think it should be the law of the land. And for me, my North Star in politics is ensuring that everyone has health care and that when they face those inevitable challenges of life, including an illness or a loved one with an illness, that they don't have to sacrifice their financial security in order to grapple with that life event. And so in the state Senate, I was the chair of our health committee. We passed the largest investment in our Medicaid program since the Affordable Care Act. We passed my paid family and medical leave law, which starts January 1st, 2026. Delaware workers will now be able to get paid family and medical leave if they're welcoming a child into their family, struggling through a serious illness, or taking care of a loved one struggling through a serious illness. And so we were able to, I think, expand the safety net in this state to look out for more people when they're facing those challenges. But I decided when the House seat opened up to run for Congress because I know that if we are going to actually address these issues with the boldness and urgency that they demand and that they need, ultimately we're going to need federal action.
Right.
Like the state can come in and it can do a lot, which we did. We passed paid family and medical leave. It's the largest expansion of the social safety net in modern Delaware history. But if we're going to achieve universal health care, we need federal action.
And that's what led you to say, I might need to step further into this.
Yes, and I thought that the federal government is a place that has the capacity to do immense good, and it is not fulfilling that responsibility and that opportunity. And we need people who are both committed to that responsibility and also know how to make government work, who know how to actually get shit done.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, we can have people in Congress with good intentions, but if they don't also know how to make those goals a reality, then we're going to have a lot of great ideas, but no actual progress. And so I thought, I think I have a good track record here in Delaware. I had a track record as an advocate, helping to take things that people thought were impossible and transform them not only into possibility, but into reality. And we need more of that at the federal level, because I think in so many ways, this moment, the country is experiencing its own crisis of hope. And I think people fear that we no longer have either the individual or collective capacity to meet the scope and the scale of the challenges that we face. They are giving up on government as a force for good. And when you give up on government being a force for good, when you give up on politics being a mechanism for progress, you fall into the dystopia of disillusionment, or others fall into the arms of an autocrat, which is what we're seeing with Trump. right? And that's the problem. That's the problem in this moment in our politics is you've got a lot of good people who want good things just giving up, and a lot of other people who also want good things but are living in a state of uncertainty and fear, seeing that uncertainty and fear exploited by someone like Donald Trump, who picks on marginalized groups, who basically is saying, listen, politics is going to work for you, so I'm going to give you something else. I'm going to turn politics into a form of entertainment, and I'm going to give you the sense of fellowship and community that too often people feel like they don't have by creating this coalition that's defined not by who's in, but by who's out.
That's a good way of putting it.
And I just think if we want to inoculate this country to Trumpism, if we want to solve the crisis in our country right now that I believe the current administration and its forces represent, then we have to solve the crisis of hope that exists right now. This is a long answer. But
no, and we're going to hit on this too. Okay. We're going to hit on this too.
Because the final thing I just wanted to say on that note, just while I'm talking about what feeds Trumpism, I got elected to the House, and one of the first things you have to do is you give a speech on the floor of the House of Representatives.
And what month was that this year?
This was in late January, early February, I think. Maybe February, maybe mid-February, I can't remember. But one of the first things you do is you give a maiden speech. And I thought long and hard about what do I want to talk about in this moment, because there's so much to talk about. It was the early days of the administration.
How much time do you got?
5 minutes.
Typical.
And in the House, we have to be quick, 1 minute or 5 minutes. And the Senate, you can just talk forever. I thought, what do I want to talk about? And I ultimately came back to a speech that Franklin Roosevelt delivered in that same chamber, the same well that I was about to speak from. And it was a speech he gave in 1944. And in that speech, it's in the shadow of the Great Depression, as war is raging on two continents, as the greatest generation is dying on the beaches of Normandy to defeat tyranny in Europe. Franklin Roosevelt gives this speech and he says, necessitous people are not free people. People who are hungry and out of a job are the things that dictatorships are made of. And that's what we see right now. We see a lot of people who are hungry, who are sick, who are out of a job. And when people are desperate, when people are fearful about the future, a strong man can come in and say, I alone can fix it. And that is the greatest risk to our democracy and our freedoms. And it reinforces that you cannot have democracy and freedom if you don't have economic opportunity and economic security.
And that's where I want to go to, so I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to come back to the national side.
Great.
But we're both Delawareans,
yes.
So it would not be a good conversation if we didn't talk about Delaware. So you've made it to now the national stage, but again, you served on the Senate.
Yeah.
You were involved in these conversations. I want to specifically talk jobs, housing,
yes.
and education. Job market, I got a couple stats right now. So the job market just since last December 2024, our unemployment rate, our U3, was 3.6%. Today it's 4.7%. It's gone up over a point, which is actually a much faster pace than the national has gone up. The housing scenario, I've had a front row seat on accident to watching the working class get priced out of the American dream. And I lived in Kent County, Delaware, was raised on Main Street in Felton. And so if I were to look at Felton pricing, right, if I were to go to 2019, median income's $58,000, median home's $215,000. Now the median income has gone up about 18% to $70,000, but the median home's gone up 58% to $340,000. And then if we look at education, this is a very interesting one, but also at the same light. It's like, man, we're going through issues now, and now we're seeing the next generation have similar problems starting out. So if we look at 8th grade math, 72% in 2005 in Delaware would test at a basic level, 30% would be proficient. If we took that same exact metric today, it's now 51% are at basic level and only 19% proficient. We were 3 points above the basic score level nationally. Now we're 9 points below it.
Yeah.
So when we look at education, it seems to be on a downward spiral. When we look at housing, which a national problem, but Delaware seeing with its lack of jobs, especially in the central areas, not backing up income. And then jobs.
Yeah.
People need work. We need fulfillment, and careers often end up being a piece of the identity. So as someone who's now, of course, a part of the national conversations,
Yeah.
you were fully involved in the local conversation.
Yeah.
So what's changing or happening, or at least being talked about to give people that word hope about economic future in Delaware specifically?
You know, first of all of the statistics that you just said are completely unacceptable. And behind every single one of those statistics is a student who's not going to be able to fulfill their fullest potential throughout their life, is a family that's not being able to buy a home, which you use the phrase, the American dream, and we know home ownership is literally sort of the foundation.
Well, it's because you're getting your shares. We're a shareholder company, or company, Freudian slip. We're a shareholder country, right?
Right.
And if we can't give someone to have a share in the literal dirt, what do they have?
Right. And that is one of the reasons why it is so foundational, the American dream. And as people are priced out of any kind of quality, stable housing, let alone home ownership, as a first-time home buyer gets older and older and older across our country because of the price of housing, because people can't make enough and all of the other costs aren't low enough for them to be able to save to buy that first home. For all of those reasons, people feel like the American dream is increasingly a myth, unaffordable, inaccessible, and all of these things are particularly acute in places throughout our state. When I was in the state legislature, Delaware is actually one of the fastest growing states.
Correct.
On the sort of East Coast, particularly
especially
the
Sussex
Mid-Atlantic.
County. Yeah, Sussex County.
Sussex County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country.
Correct.
And a lot of that growth is wonderfully among our retiree population. And a lot of that growth, as you very well know, is also sort of traditional single-family homes.
Yes, out-of-state retirees, single-family.
And I am always happy when anyone decides to call Delaware home, decides to make this great state, which is the greatest state in the Union, home. And that is also resulting in a rapidly aging population here in Delaware. And that dynamic is true across the country, but it's sort of a double tsunami here in Delaware because we've already got an aging workforce without folks coming up behind them. And so you've got an aging workforce that's retiring, and then retirees coming here, right? And so this creates, in a sense, a house of cards for our state. Because if you don't have a sufficient workforce to pay taxes, to fill jobs, especially in places like healthcare,
huge,
you're not going to have the revenue, you're not going to have the infrastructure, you're not going to have the support necessary to grapple with that rapidly aging population.
And I think there's already suggestion locally to potentially stop building, and a moratorium on building, so that we can get that medical infrastructure in place.
Well, and there's also been proposals that the state legislature has put forward to say, listen, if you are going to develop, the developers need to make sure that they're paying the state in a fee, essentially, to grapple with the consequences of the growth, right? An impact fee, in essence. So that there's more money for schools to grapple with growth. There's more money for healthcare to grapple with growth. And at the same time, we also know that we have a housing supply shortage.
Yes, wasn't that a double-edged sword? If you're bringing more money in, you're forcing the builder to pay more?
So one, we've got to make sure that if we're building, one of the problems that we're seeing right now is that the growth isn't always smart growth. It's a lot of very expensive single-family homes on relatively decent-sized lots. And you've got it's relatively inexpensive to build these homes. Obviously, tariffs have made it worse, but relatively inexpensive to build these homes. You get a lot of money from the home buyer, but it's only accessible to relatively wealthy folks. And in that context, there should be, I think, a requirement that the profits that come from that type of development go toward offsetting the consequences.
The impact that happens to the area.
But to your point, we cannot add more costs to developing the kind of housing supply that will actually provide accessible and affordable housing for the great middle.
So what's the solution there? Because I look at, there was recently a showcase at the National Mall, Scott Turner ran, modern modulars, tiny homes, 3D print opportunities. I went to this. I was thinking, wow, yeah, this is great. And it's the second year they've done it, I think. It's like, okay, this is the second year we've done this, similar projects. Why aren't we doing it?
Well, I think all of that is necessary. Yeah. All of that is good. We also need to make sure that when development happens, it's funny, with housing, my perception is sometimes, broadly speaking nationally, you've got two levers for policy, funding and regulation. And I think broadly speaking nationally, we have the levers in the wrong direction. We have too little funding and perhaps too much regulation, where we're stifling any kind of development. I think the problem that you see down in Sussex, though, is it's all the single-family home development. And so perhaps we could use a little bit more guidance when the development occurs to guarantee that it's smart development, that it's mixed use, that it's single-family homes, semi-detached, multifamily dwellings, that we've got the full gamut in this development.
From building vertically? Like, we seem like especially down south, obviously we're here, a lot more vertical.
More vertical.
But you get into Kent County, everything's two-story below.
Well, I think there's some interest in some slightly higher. So I'm excited about some of the ideas that they have around the Dover downtown development, which would have
Dover 2030, right?
Yeah, some not high rises, not high rises that
higher rises.
Yeah, but they're more than 2 stories.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But the reality is that you need capital.
You need funding.
And so I believe that the federal government has to be a partner in that. I think the federal government has to make the kind of investment in housing that the shortages that we have demand.
So you're saying to solve the problem at this point at a local Delaware level, Delaware is not within the power to solve the problem?
Well, I think Delaware can do a lot. I think Delaware can do a lot in making sure that we have smarter growth when it occurs. Delaware can do more, and local governments can do more to guide development when it does occur, to guarantee that it's not just a bunch of sprawl, but single-family sprawl, but has the mixed use, has the density that's necessary. But that's hard to do at the local level because there's a lot of opposition to it when you occur. So actually something I'm working on right now at the federal level is to say we're going to bring federal resources to bear, and we're going to make sure that funding, a historic investment in funding to local jurisdictions to build more housing, is matched with the regulatory changes that are necessary. So whether that's in an environment where there's no regulation and it's just the sort of cheap single-family sprawl that's occurring, to make sure there's more of a funnel so that there's smart development, density, what we need, or in the event that the regulation is so cumbersome that there's no development occurring, that we loosen that up so that we have more development, and again, that it's smart development. We're working on this bill right now. I'll have more to announce in a couple of weeks because you need a stick and carrot in there too.
And this is federal.
This would be a federal solution, but it would basically use federal dollars to infuse the housing construction market across the country, and use those dollars also to incentivize the regulatory changes at the local level
to get the supply,
to unlock the supply once the funding's available. But the other thing I would say about Delaware is, because I started talking about how we've got an aging population, we have to make Delaware more attractive for young people to live, work, and raise a family. Yes. That's part of what paid family and medical leave was about, to make it so that families don't have to give up their income when they have a kid. We've got to have universal pre-K. We've got to have affordable childcare. We've got to make sure our K through 12 public schools are phenomenal, so that no matter what zip code you're in, you know that you don't have to roll the die to get into a charter school or pay for a private school tuition, that you can have a quality traditional public school in your area. If we can have that cradle through career support system that lowers costs for families, improves outcomes for children, and makes this state more attractive to raise a family in, then we'll have the workforce necessary too. And obviously the housing component is a critical part of it.
The federal side, I have a devil's advocate for.
Okay.
So let's say we do create a perfect world where we get affordable supply built. Because it is a checks and balances of how do you allow for an ecosystem for a business to say, you know what, I want to come in here and I want to build.
Yes.
Versus, okay, you're just free to build whatever you want. It's the Wild West and we don't end up actually solving the problem.
Right.
It just becomes a capitalist playground.
Right.
I go to the capitalist side and say, okay, I work with clients all the time, and I know about 30% of them are investors. And I have about 2,000 people right now that if I sent an email out to, say, I have a $200,000 home in Dover ready to be flipped, I have someone that's going to be ready to pick it up right then and there. What prevents we start building sprawling rows of townhomes and affordable condominiums and smaller homes, 800, 1,000 square foot homes, which we're clearly not building much of, just for profit's sake, it's tough to build. We solve those problems, we make them buildable. What prevents the investor, the corporation, the boogeyman hedge fund, Wall Street, for coming in and ripping that from the everyday layman Delawarean? Because as we know, Q2 2025, that is 1/3 of buyers in our housing market. Is there anything, and we're going to switch back to the federal level, so maybe this is a good segue. Is there anything at the federal level that is seemingly being done to maybe curtail this institutional LLC-born investor buyer from ripping into our housing market?
I mean, unfortunately, the short-term answer is no, because we've got a majority in Congress and an administration that is in the pocket of the wealthy, the already wealthy major corporations and those who are essentially hoarding, whether it's housing, hoarding wealth, and leaving everyone else out there to squabble over the scraps.
But somebody would say to the Biden side, or just the Democrats, what if they think that the same thing is happening on the other end, like two sides of the same coin?
Well, and what is clear is that the Democratic Party, when we've had power, hasn't done enough to combat that. So I'm not saying that there's no blame to go around. I will say, I think that there is a very clear difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party on all of these issues. I mean, when the Democratic Party was in power, we didn't do enough, and they stood up to the pharmaceutical industry and at least got some drugs able to be negotiated under Medicare. Not enough. I think we've seen not enough of a backbone, but we have seen, at least when Democrats are in power, a willingness to buck a lot of corporate interests, maybe not all and maybe not enough, but buck corporate interests in a way that you don't see at all when the Republicans are in power. So yeah, imperfect, but there's definitely a real difference, and I have a front row seat to it. For all the frustrations that one can and should have with the Democratic Party or Democratic leaders, it's night and day between the two parties. But I think what you're describing, it's not just a problem in the housing space, it's a problem in healthcare, it's a problem in emergency responders, across the board we're seeing private equity just gobble up so much.
Infrastructure, utilities,
everything,
power grids.
Everything. And we have to rein that in. We have to have laws that rein that in. We have to have laws also that address the massive accumulation of wealth.
Is that conversation happening?
Yes, okay. It is.
Okay,
it is.
it's
absolutely,
happening.
Absolutely. And we need to have the power to do it, and we have to have people in place who are willing to do it. And it has to be a fundamental transformation, because the greatest threat that we face right now in the short, medium, and long term is that we already have massive wealth disparities that are allowing a very small group of people to accumulate not only wealth, but things, industries, and just assets of all kinds.
Yes.
And what we are seeing right now, if left unregulated and unchanged, the wealth disparity we see right now is going to explode even further with the advent of expansion of AI and new technologies. I mean, what we could see if we don't seize this moment and regulate emerging technologies with the kind of clarity and scope that they demand, the wealth disparity of the future is going to make the wealth disparity now seem like child's play.
I think that's where people get in the worries of technocracies and
yes.
There's even a game called Cyberpunk that's based around that type of future wealth disparity based off technology.
Absolutely, because it's going to dramatically increase productivity while, in many cases, gutting the American workforce. And when you have massive productivity and the workers not being able to share in the bounty of that productivity, it's going to have an upheaval in our economy. There are going to be some new jobs that are created, but the replacement rate is not going to be sufficient to guarantee everyone has.
I have a stat for that.
So I'd love to hear it. What?
So on the national level, this is where I want to shift the end of our conversation.
Yeah.
So I got into your journey and how you got here, which I think is, I was just curious to know, like, what gets somebody into this position? There's always a different story. A lot of it does seem around, though, like career politician vibes, where I like to hear someone who's in here because, like, I wanted to see a change, so I was going to be a part of the change.
Yeah.
And a moment in your life that could have very well crippled you turned into a moment where you stepped up into it, which we didn't get into it, but I had to imagine it had to be extremely difficult. But moving into another more difficult situation is you're now in the national stage of government in probably one of the most controversial, turbulent, chaotic times in politics.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about Sean all the time. You know, he came up through high school, walked out of it, and it's like, okay, politics is kind of a circus, and okay, COVID, I got to go home now for a little bit, and okay, it's 2.5 years later, whoa, I can't afford anything. And this person's expected to do the normal, everyday American lifestyle thing. And I find myself advocating so much more for that young generation that's looking up at this government thinking, what am I supposed to do? And I think the numbers are starting to reflect it across generations. So Pew Research puts out this smooth trends on government trust, and they have for years. And it peaked with Bush, 2002, wonder why, all right, at 54. Clinton peaks at 45, his average is about 32. Bush's average is about 37. Then this time in history, I said we're going to go back to it, 2008 to 2011. The housing crash, the great financial crash, the bank bailout, and I think also a little bit to do with it would be Citizens United. All in a similar time span. And since then, that number's never gone above 20 again. Peaking at 19 with Obama, peaking at 18 in the first term of Trump, and currently sitting at an all-time low of 17. What is a young person supposed to do when they look at this chaotic government and think, how am I supposed to just be the American citizen I'm supposed to be?
Yeah. I mean, I think you touched on really critical pivot points for our country.
Because you got it, and I love that you got started there just at the beginning, before that was
just
happening.
Before it happened, yeah.
Politics felt different then, didn't it?
It did. It felt very different then. And I think you mentioned Citizens United, and I think I've been in Congress for a year now. I don't think that there has been a more damaging Supreme Court decision in modern history than Citizens United.
And for anyone listening that doesn't know what that is, can you
So
explain what
basically, Citizens United, the Supreme Court decided that money is speech, which is a ridiculous thing to say. It might sound, that makes sense at start. No. If money were speech, then we wouldn't have any anti-bribery laws, right? You can come into my office and you can advocate to me that why you believe I should support, HR 10, and you can give me your reasons. That's speech. If you come into this office and say, support HR 10 and here's $1 million to do it, that would be criminal, rightfully so. Money is not speech. And what Citizens United allowed for is essentially unfettered, unregulated money in our campaigns. It allows for either corporations, industries, or uber wealthy individuals to spend unlimited amounts of money in support or in opposition of political candidates. We saw it in the last election. Elon Musk, hundreds of millions of dollars spent by one individual in support of his hand-picked candidates. And, you know, a lot of times people talk about sort of money in politics, and they talk about the donations people get from this group or that person or that person. And like, that is nothing compared to the unfettered, exorbitant amounts of money.
Unfathomable
amounts of money that a single wealthy individual or a single corporation or a single industry can put into elections to essentially rig the outcome. Because no matter how much I could raise, $5 million. The cap for an individual to give to me is $7,000. I could raise millions of dollars from grassroots donors or people giving that. You could never compete. You could never raise enough, even if everyone was giving you $7,000, to be able to compete with the amount of money that is now allowed in our elections after Citizens United that has corrupted our election season.
Now, does that get brought up on the floor? Does that word ever even approach someone's mouth, the word Citizens United, or even the thought process of ripping that out?
Absolutely. In fact, there's a group called End Citizens United. They were in the Capitol speaking to our caucus just a week and a half ago.
And how'd that go?
Great. I mean, people in our caucus want to see that changed. The last time Democrats had control of Congress, they passed a bill. It didn't get all the way through. They passed a bill to reform campaign finance laws. But the problem is the Supreme Court has limited Congress's ability to regulate money in politics.
What do you mean?
Well, that's what Citizens United is. Citizens United said there is a constitutional right for the wealthiest people to spend unlimited money. And so that means that unless the Supreme Court undoes that decision or a constitutional amendment is passed, Congress is not able to limit it in the way that it demands, in the way that it needs to. And that's one of the reasons why you have to have court reform. You have to have conflict of interest, actual anti-corruption rules for the Supreme Court, which do not exist.
Yeah, antitrust is a joke at this moment.
You have to, but you have, well, antitrust is a joke, but you have to have a code of conduct for Supreme Court justices, because right now we see money influencing just them personally, potentially. But
that is not happening. Come on.
Right, yeah.
Of course not.
Clarence Thomas
Stop.
Vacationing at the homes of people who have cases
That has
before him.
nothing
That
to
has
do
that
with
has no
it, Mr.
impact.
Bride, come on.
But it is, the reality is that Citizens United created this super right, this constitutional right for the uber wealthy to spend unlimited money.
But what about people who say that's against free speech? We're America. You have money, you can spend it. Who are you to limit what someone can put into a campaign, a donor, someone's pocket, a lobbyist? Wasn't that the thought process of why it got passed originally?
Like I said, Citizens United was rooted in this notion that money is speech. And again, if money were speech...
Is there any reason why that seemed to come right after the GFC? Right after the Great Financial? Is there any connection there? Why then? Why didn't it get passed in 1986? Why didn't it get passed 2 years ago?
Well, I think it was in part, you had a 30-year effort to pack the courts. You had in 2000 a disputed election. The Supreme Court was split 5-4. It decided to give the election essentially to George W. Bush, which then guaranteed you had a Republican president appointing Republican judges for the next 8 years. And so by the time Citizens United got to the Supreme Court in 2010, with the sole exception of 2 years under Obama and 8 years under Clinton, the previous 40 years essentially had been Republican rule.
Correct.
And so you had a Supreme Court that was essentially appointed by and large by Republican presidents. And so you had a Supreme Court that was ready to make that decision. And then once again, in 2015, you had an inflection point where Antonin Scalia died. President Obama should have had the ability to fill that vacancy, but Senate Republicans made up a rule that they would not confirm, that you can't confirm a judicial nominee by a president in the last year of their term. They made this up out of nowhere.
New rule.
Convenient.
Convenient. It's always convenient.
They had that rule. They created that rule. And they had the Senate at the time, so they had control. They created this rule. Barack Obama didn't fill that seat. Donald Trump gets elected, fills that seat. Then, at the end of Donald Trump's term, Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies. Oh, remember that 1 year rule that you can't nominate anyone? We're going to pretend like that didn't exist because it was in the final year of Trump's first term. So Trump nominates someone, and the Republican Senate confirms that nominee. And so now you have a Supreme Court that's essentially been packed.
So we have a loaded Supreme Court that even if the Congress were to come out and say we want to repeal this, we have partisan support, it wouldn't be enough at this moment because of that setup in the court.
There are solutions that I think you could put forward that even under Citizens United could rein things in, but ultimately we have to overturn Citizens United.
Because we kind of unlocked Pandora's box essentially, because we gave the infinite money glitch to the people that want to see that infinite money glitch alive and prospering, yes. Right? And like if you were to come up and say, we're going to repeal this, they could financially line every single opposition against you, right?
Correct. But this is why elections matter. Because in 2016, imperfect as she may have been, they made this rule: presidents can't nominate someone the Senate will not confirm a nominee in the final year of a president's term. Had Hillary Clinton won that election, she would have filled Antonin Scalia's seat with an appointee from a Democrat, and I bet you Citizens United would have been overturned within a year. And so this is an example of elections having consequences. We have to recognize it's going to take a long time for us to undo the harms that have been inflicted on us, not just during what will likely be 8 years of the Trump administration, under 8 years of Trump, but also 40 years of a right-wing effort to get judges at the lower courts, right-wing efforts to undermine unions, right-wing efforts to gut the social safety net. All of these efforts over 40 years laid the foundation. We have to recognize that if we are going to undo this harm and put our country back on track toward universal health care, toward paid family medical leave nationally, we're not going to get it all in one foul swoop. We're going to have to play the long game, and it's not going to be easy. The odds might be against us. But you cannot tell me that the reasons for hopelessness in this moment are greater than the reasons for hopelessness at almost any other point in history, because that sense that we felt in 2007 or 2008 as Obama was rising, that sort of with hard work change was inevitable, that we were on this sort of unending cultural wave of momentum, that we were able to make our politics deliver big things for us. It hadn't always worked out, but we had that sense. There was that hope. That's the exception in our history. You cannot tell me that the reasons for hopelessness now, for all of the things we've talked about, are greater than the reasons for hopelessness for an enslaved person in the 1850s. You cannot tell me that the reasons for hopelessness now are greater than the reasons for hopelessness for a child working in a factory during the Gilded Age. You cannot tell me that the reasons for hopelessness now are greater than the reasons for hopelessness for an unemployed worker in the early days of the Great Depression who had never heard of a New Deal. Yes, we have big challenges right now. And yes, they could be so big and so unique that we don't have the capacity to meet them. Maybe. I hope not, but maybe. But even if that is true, you cannot tell me that the obstacles are bigger and that there is more reason for hopelessness now than at any one of those previous moments.
And you mentioned the 45 years or 46 years coming up on of that Republican rule. You're talking about, of course, Reaganomics and the tax bracket shifts and unions and regulations. You're talking about even drifting into Clinton, you get Glass-Steagall and NAFTA and sending jobs over borders. Then we get a margin rule change for the SEC in 2004, letting investors do whatever they'd like. Citizens United. And man, the money printing is just continuing that wealth gap growth.
Yeah.
But you're saying the hope is there. See, I delve into these topics that are ultimately like, it seems like you get to the end of the maze, it's like, oh shoot.
Yeah.
All right, let's try again.
Yeah.
And then you go to the next, and you're like, oh shoot, okay, all right, another roadblock, try again. And it's tough to stay in that I guess the word is like nihilistic mindset.
Yeah.
But we can't stay there.
No.
Because I'm the guy like, let's read, not doom scroll. Let's go
Yeah.
to the gym in the morning. Let's get after it. Let's go after it. Let's get our energy up. Let's keep our head high. But then you look into these topics, it's like, it seems like the billionaires kind of have not the winning hand, but it's like, geez, they've won quite a few games in a row, and that momentum is growing and building. So just talk to me about the steps toward hope, the steps toward change. What could happen? What can we support? What can we advocate for? What could a young person listen to this, old person listen to this, think, okay, I can get involved at a local, state, or national level like you? Like, what are the steps? What do we have to untangle?
So money can corrupt our politics. Money is a corrosive effort. And yet, our vote is still more powerful. We can overcome the influence of money in politics if we don't give up, if we join together in a mass coalition of working class people in opposition to that. You see time and time again races where the billionaires come in and they drop tens of millions of dollars, and yet their candidate of choice loses.
Correct.
It's not inevitable.
That's fair.
Human beings are endowed with exceptional free will and capacity to see through efforts to propagandize them. We have to be conscious, and we have to choose to stay involved and to stay engaged. We have to choose to continue to have conversations with people.
And people are, I believe, seeing more through consciously the propaganda.
Yes.
So you're saying the second step is now, okay, you recognize it, now we need to form a coalition to stand against it.
That's correct. And you know, I think the irony is sort of the tech platforms, the tech oligarchs are going to be casualties of their own success.
We were just talking about this. We were just
well,
talking about
it's
this.
like they have unleashed. The one thing is they've unleashed so much disinformation and misinformation, intentionally, organically, unintentionally, at us, that it's for a while destabilized. I mean, it has people operating off of inaccurate information, different sets of information, echo chambers. But what it's done, too, is it's now resulting in people not believing anything. So now people, though, won't believe the very propaganda that the tech oligarchs tried to feed them, because they have done such a good job of undermining the accurate information. They've consumed everyone with disinformation. Everyone's started to wake up to that.
Yes.
And so now people just don't believe anything. And that's a problem.
Yeah, especially with AI around the corner.
But at least they're not believing the disinformation and the misinformation anymore in the same way. At least they're starting to go, I need to have skepticism about what's being put in front of me. And I think part of the solution here is we have to start to have conversations one-on-one, in person. It's called relational organizing. And look, I know that feels like a drop in the bucket, but if enough people start to do what you're doing, start to have real, honest, clear dialogues with people, yes, through social media and within our own individual lives, I do believe we can organize our way out of this. We can organize a durable coalition that is immune to the propaganda, that is at least has armor against the propaganda from the big moneyed interests, and we can ultimately win elections. And if we win enough elections, we can then adopt over time the policies necessary to roll back Citizens United, to reinstill the kinds of financial protections that existed post-New Deal that, when reversed, unleashed the Great Recession. We can then put our country on a positive path toward the kinds of policies I think we believe in, like universal health care. We have it within our power. We are not without agency. And cynicism is understandable, but it is unproductive.
Correct.
And the greatest danger we have in this moment is thinking that hope is naive, thinking that hope is cliche, thinking that hope is false. The reality is, hope is often a conscious emotion. I think we started to let ourselves think that hope is something that we should just organically feel. Sometimes you have to summon it.
Right.
In fact, the most important moments to find hope are the moments where you actually have to summon that hope. Even when everything is telling you that you have no reason to. Even when everything is telling you that the system is so stacked against you that you're never going to be able to defeat it. That's the moment we have to summon hope. And the one thing I will say, because I think one of the reasons why I think it's easy to become cynical is not just the money in our politics. It's this feeling we get when we go online, we go on social media. And it can feel like when we're doom scrolling, when we're being fed either content that completely agrees with us or content that completely disagrees with us, that there's no hope to change hearts and minds anymore. That basically we've got the numbers we have right now, that's the best we're ever going to get. They might not be good enough, and so we're doomed. And that is a false sense of reality that social media feeds us. It's the availability bias of social media, where we get fed the most extreme 5% on either side, and it can lead you to believe that persuasion is pointless. One of the benefits I have as an elected official is I touch grass. I'm out of social media as much as we love it. I'm off social media. I'm also on it because you have to be on it, but I'm also off social media, and I go out into the community. I go across the state, and I meet with people, liberal, conservative, moderate, Democrats, independents, Republicans, people who vote, people who don't vote, people across industries and ages. And not only do I have conversations with different kinds of people, but I actually have conversations about politics with different kinds of people. And you realize that when you have those conversations in person, yeah, we have real disagreements, but we're not as divided as the algorithm makes it seem. And when you realize that, it gives you the hope and the knowledge necessary to believe that we can still have dialogue that changes people's minds, that we can actually still have conversation across disagreement that can build that multiracial, diverse working class coalition, the supermajority necessary to undo things like Citizens United. Because at the end of the day, democracy can only exist if we maintain our faith in one another's capacity to change. And social media undermines that faith.
Agreed. Algorithmically.
Designed
that way.
It is literally part and parcel of the product.
Yeah.
And it's why Section 230 and the adoption of the laws in the 90s that essentially leave the social media platforms completely immune to any liability for what occurs on their platforms is one of the most corrosive policies, whether it was intentional or not, to be adopted.
Did you skip ahead? Is that the answer to your question?
I skipped ahead.
You skipped ahead. I gave you that question ahead of time. I trusted
Sorry.
you. No, it's all good. So we'll go in because I want to know specifics on 230.
Yeah.
But I want to be respectful of your time, Ms. McBride. This has been extremely fun.
Yeah, sorry my answers are long, but
No.
you've asked such central questions to this moment.
Wanted to bring a good amount of questions for the amount of time we had. But with that in mind, I have 3 final questions I want to end with. We'll be able to go back and bleed into Section 230.
And I only know that you're going to ask that because you were you mentioned Glass-Steagall earlier, and you said you like to ask people what their what the most pivotal law is.
Yeah, well, that's my first question. So just some rapid fire, just 3 questions, and then we'll head off. Which legislation do you think did the most long-term damage or caused the most impact to our current economy?
I think that you can't identify one. I know we were talking beforehand. You mentioned Glass-Steagall. I think that's a great answer. I think the thing that is on my mind is Section 230.
And why?
Even though it's not directly sort of economic policy, I think one could argue it is. But two, Section 230 essentially says that these digital platforms do not have any liability for what gets placed on their platforms. And I get that. I get the instinct for that, right? I get saying, listen, these are essentially open platforms. Anyone can post anything. Yeah. And it would be unfair to hold Meta liable for
all of its users.
Every user. That it's different because it doesn't make the same kind of editorial decisions that, say, a newspaper would make, which does have liability.
Sure, because they have direct control over the content that's going out there.
And so I get that there has to be some degree of understanding of how these platforms work. But I do believe that they should be held liable once they have the knowledge of harmful content, that they should be held liable for not ameliorating or addressing that harm. I think they should be held liable for the fact that they knew very well for years that these platforms are addictive, that these platforms are not only addictive but have negative consequences for people's mental health, especially young people. I think they should be held liable if blanket, gross disinformation and misinformation is allowed to spread while they know that it is spreading and do nothing about it. I do think that social media companies have to have some degree of liability. A reasonable standard, they have to know. They have to know and be able to do, they can't solve everything. So it has to be a knowing standard, and effort, doesn't have to solve it, but they have to be held accountable to at least, once they know, try to address the harm that these social media platforms have inflicted, especially on young people, but across our body politic in a way that has been corrosive to our politics and ultimately corrosive to the policies that result from that politics.
And I agree, and I like that you sandwiched in the middle the neurological, social, chemical release in the brain effects.
Yes.
That we now know of.
Yes.
And are still corroding everybody who uses it.
Can I go on a tangent on that? I know because
Please.
I want to give you a little
Please.
Pull back the curtain on
Please.
Congress thing with that, because I have a front row seat to the addictive nature of social media on members of Congress.
Ooh, okay.
Okay, so
shout them out. You could just take the behavior. We can stick there.
I think everyone, probably most people have seen how some members of Congress treat me. One of the things that you always hear about the most provocative members of Congress, it's not true for everyone, but a lot of them, people say, my colleagues will say, they were so normal when they got here. They were so normal when they got here. And when you see Congress, most of the people that are there want to be serious people. They want to do serious work. But a handful of people suck up all the oxygen. And it is because they are employing the strategies of reality TV, right? How do you get airtime on The Real Housewives? You throw wine in someone's face. Now that gets you a couple minutes on an episode. How do you get a season-long story arc? You have a beef with a person. It's when the person who you throw wine in the face of throws wine back. Creates a beef. That is true on The Real Housewives. It's true in Congress. And attention is power. Attention is power. And so you've got a lot of people who are engaging in the politics of reality TV in order to get attention. But I used to think that pursuit of attention was a rational decision-making process. That these people who you see throwing wine in the face of other people in Congress, that they were doing it to get attention in order to build their profile, in order to build their platform, in order to increase their influence.
To create change.
To create change, or to do what they want to do in Congress. Maybe to get another position, but to have some sort of rational outcome.
Yeah.
But what I've realized is it's not that. It is purely addictive behavior. These people were so normal when they got here. And the thing is, we know that social media is addictive. When you post something on social media and it gets a couple of extra likes, it's a dopamine hit. But when someone posts a picture, it gets a couple of hundred likes, that's like a puff of a cigarette. When you go viral as a member of Congress, it is like an instantly addictive high, equivalent to some of the most potent drugs that are out there.
This is interesting. So you're accusing Congress of clip farming.
Yes. I mean, these people, the behavior you see, when you open social media and you turn on your TV and you go, what the fuck are these people doing? Why are they behaving this way? They're embarrassing themselves. It's because they are addicted and they are chasing that next high. And they will do self-destructive behavior. They will inflict whatever collateral damage on the country, on their colleagues is necessary in pursuit of that next moment of virality because they are desperate for that high once again.
I'm glad we pulled back the curtain on that.
Yeah.
That was good. I hadn't put those two together. Mm-hmm. And the first part I hadn't even thought of maybe there are people just trying to get the attention built for pursuance of the change, but you're just saying straight up addiction.
So look, in this job, you have to be good at getting attention in this competitive attention economy, right? You have to I need to be heard for my constituents. I need my policies to be heard. So I need to get some level of attention.
Of course, but you went from a world pre-social media where getting in front of even 4,000 people was an insane feat to now a viral video could get passed around and you got 3 million impressions, you're getting interviews, you're known for something.
Or 30 years ago, all you had to do is have 3 cameras and you were in front of every American, right? Because everyone watched either ABC, NBC, or CBS 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Now, everyone has their own individualized source of news and information in front of them. And so to get in front of a lot of people, you have to break through. And so that is necessary. It's when you start seeing people engage in embarrassing, self-destructive behavior, and you wonder why people in Congress act like that, they are suffering from the addictive consequences of social media.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about AI real fast.
Yes.
This connects national and Delaware.
Yeah.
Delaware City has a new 6 million square foot. I'm sure you've already heard about this.
Yes.
1.2 gigawatt data center. It's 11 buildings. It's currently under review. Apparently a rezoning thing. Half of it's already zoned for it, half isn't. Where do you stand on this? Because this is something as it stands is supposed to be starting Q3 of 2026. It's obviously delayed, maybe 2027, but data centers have been linked to a lot of power bills going up and has been linked obviously to it's purely for AI, it's purely for these big companies, it's purely for the oligarchs, and it's ripping into our power grids.
Yes.
Where do you stand on that? Because it's a fight that we have to fight in this AI race that we're kind of in. It's like a space race of AI. But now even our local homes in Delaware are going to be affected by this race. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first stepping back to your point, AI is a tool that can do either unimaginable harm, good, or a mix of both.
Fair.
And AI is inevitable to a large degree, right? If it's not happening here, it's going to be developed in another country. And,
correct.
There is a reasonable argument, if it's going to be developed somewhere, let's have it developed here.
Fair.
And let's make sure it's developed in as sort of just a way as possible. But then to that point, if there is this AI race and you need these data centers to facilitate them, then you have a conversation about the very real world consequences of data centers. The impact on the grid, the impact on water, the impact on the communities that surround it. One, I think, as is the case with any kind of zoning decision, obviously the local entities that are making those decisions should be as thoughtful as possible about the consequences for people around them. But what I'm looking at in Congress is how do we have a holistic solution for this? Because it's unfair to everyone involved to just have this battle over these data centers community by community by community. It's unfair to those communities, and it does create a challenge in the AI arms race. So one of the things that I have been working on is, to the degree that these data centers are inevitably going to exist somewhere and in some places, how do we make them not harmful to the surrounding communities? And so one of the things that actually I've been working on is getting federal investment for, and this is something that's very, very much supported by environmental justice advocates. There is technology that's being developed here in Delaware that would reduce the water and electrical needs of data centers by 90%.
That's significant.
Significant.
And that's here in Delaware being developed?
Yeah, it's being developed here in Delaware. And we actually, the House of Representatives just passed an amendment that I had put forward that would result in millions of dollars of investment to that emerging technology here in Delaware urgently, so that we can finish it, scale it up, and make sure that, to the degree that we have data centers, they're not the data centers of today. They're not draining power. They're not destroying the grid capacity. They're not raiding water in an area. Because at the end of the day, those are the problems with the data centers. We can have a larger conversation about AI and the dangers and the opportunities with AI, but if we're talking about the problems of data centers, the problems with data centers aren't the data centers themselves.
It's the consumption.
It's the consumption.
Yeah.
And if we can address the consumption, then we address the problem.
And I've heard that counter argument of it can be good in when, like, I'm a tech guy, like computers. Like, the power in a phone that we have today is more powerful than what the president had in the 80s.
Right.
Right. I think the amount of power we have in our phone right now is more than what went to the moon. We have so much more computing power in such tinier places that kind of development in how much water is needed, how much electric is needed. 90% though. I mean,
I know
it seems that's a large decrease.
It's incredible. Well, it's
Is that like in the short-term future? Is this like a 2035 goal?
It is a short to medium-term opportunity that we have, which is not a silver bullet to the larger problems that we're going to face with AI that we have to grapple with.
The holograms that show up and I don't know what
Yeah,
they mean.
the mental health consequences. I mean, we have to recognize that AI, for better or worse, will certainly be the single greatest transformation for our species since the Industrial Revolution, but I would argue will be the single most significant transformation for our species since humans went from nomadic to agricultural-based stationary communities.
Whoa.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're in the Pong version of AI right now, and it's already changing lives with even just things like ChatGPT. It's literally taking jobs away.
Yes.
And we're at the beginning stages.
And look, I don't have all the answers, but what we know is necessary is, as this is being developed, we have to legislate now. We have to regulate now, because we can't, as we've seen with social media, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's very hard to regulate. We have to regulate while it still is in its relative infancy. And we've got to make sure that as we regulate this, not only do we channel social media to the good and mitigate the harm, but recognizing that no matter what, great social media, bad social media, it will increase productivity, which has a very real risk, as we talked about, of increasing wealth. We have to make sure the benefit, the bounty of new technologies is shared with the many and not the few.
Amen. What's next for you? It's my last question. There's so many people who make it to where you're at and it's where they choose to stay. There's many people who make it to where you're at and then decide later on I'm going to go to a different version of the American life. I've done my thing. I've done my work. And then there's others who say I want to go run for president. So what's on your mind map? What's on your goal sheet? What you got written on your mirror?
I mean, I'm a year into this job. I feel like this is an incredibly precarious moment for our country and our state, and I just want us to survive this moment and get through it and make sure we still have a democracy and some degree of support systems for people there after this moment passes. So I'm genuinely just consumed with this moment. I never thought I'd be able to be in this position. I never thought that I would have this opportunity. It seemed incomprehensible to me as a kid. And the fact that I have this opportunity, I marvel at, I am in awe of every day. I'm grateful for every day. I don't know what the future has in store. You know, I feel like I'm doing what I want to do right now. And if new opportunities arise, I'm young, so if at a certain point I say, you know what, I want to go be that travel writer, or I want to become an architect, or I don't know, I want to go into a second career life, you know, that might be something that is on the horizon for me too. I just don't know, because one of the things I've found out over the last 20 years is that life has a way of intervening when you make plans.
Sounds like you're taking it day by day then.
Day by day. That's the best anyone can do. And I have found that the only way to get more opportunity is to just do the best job you can in the job that you're in right then.
Which it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. 1 year in, hopefully the next year, even more progress. Anything you want to end on? Any way that someone specifically listening to this can support you in your efforts?
Well, I certainly, I mean, talking about making sure we continue to be heard and have a conversation. You know, people can follow me on my social media platforms, Sarah E. McBride on TikTok, Congresswoman Sarah McBride on Instagram, on Facebook, Rep McBride on an X or Twitter or whatever the hell we're calling it now.
Whatever it's called.
Please be in conversation with me, because at the end of the day, running for office, serving in office is just an ongoing conversation with your constituents in your community. And I really value that conversation. I really benefit from that conversation. And look, I don't believe that anyone has a monopoly on good ideas. I've introduced more bipartisan legislation in the House than any other freshman. And at the same time, I'm fighting for bold solutions that meet the challenges we face. And so regardless of whether you're a Democrat, Independent, or Republican, you matter, your voice matters, and I want to hear from you.
I love it. Thank you for having this conversation with me.
Thank you.
This has
really
been great.
Enjoyed it.
I hope we get to have it again.
Definitely.